Poder Judicial de Nuevo México, presentado por la jueza Cristi Carbón Gaul. Sucesión, designaciones de pago por defunción y transferencia de designaciones por defunción.
This video is Pay on Death Designations and Transfer on Death Designations, brought to you by the New Mexico Judiciary and presented by Judge Christy Carbon-Gall. The information presented in this video does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice. All information in this video is for general informational purposes only. Information in this video may not constitute the most up-to-date legal or other information. Viewers of this video should contact an attorney to obtain advice with respect to any particular legal matter. Only your individual attorney can provide assurances that the information contained herein is applicable to your particular situation. The views expressed in this video are those of the author or authors only.
Hi, I'm Christy Carbone-Gall. I am the Bernalillo County Probate Judge. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about pay on death designations and transfer on death designations. We call them PODs or TODs, and people use them on bank accounts, stock investment accounts, money markets. Sometimes they use them on, sometimes they're referred that way to them on like annuities. And so the one thing that I wanted to make sure that people understand about them is you cannot name minor beneficiaries as beneficiaries on a POD or a TOD, or else you would have to have the court-appointed conservator to accept those funds for somebody who's 18 years or older, or younger. And so that's one thing that you should know about POD and TOD. People use them to avoid going through probate, but you just have to be thoughtful about whether or not it works for your situation in particular. So one of the things that I remind people about doing is that they put a beneficiary designation on every asset. There might not be any money in the estate to do something like continue to pay to maintain a house while it's on the market, or pay for funeral expenses if all of your assets have been transferred out to beneficiaries. So you need to think about whether or not liquidity is going to be needed in the estate in order to cover some of those expenses. But also the other thing I remind people to do about PODs and TODs is this. A very traditional approach to people putting a POD or TOD designation is to name one child, with the theory that it's more efficient because then they will turn around, gather those assets and pass them out in equal shares to all of the other children that you have. One of the things that I find is even if you have children who have a great deal of integrity and that's their intention, they have to prove all of that to their siblings, and sometimes it causes some conflict that's unnecessary. But sometimes what I have found, and often actually what I find, is that the person named ends up keeping the money and not sharing it as the parents intended. There's no reason to have to go through any of that. You can name all of your kids as beneficiaries on an account so that they all get an equal share. But you definitely want to think about how you want it to be distributed out when you're filling out those beneficiary designations, the POD and the TOD accounts. Another thing that I find people doing as an alternative to the POD or TOD is they name their children on their accounts with them. So they have a bank account at the bank that says Joe Smith and Joe Smith Jr. as joint account holders on a checking account. What that means is that Junior owns that account with Dad. There are some statutory provisions in New Mexico that would allow us to fight about whether or not the account was meant to be for Junior or if it was just being held by him to help Dad pay bills. However, nobody wants to get into those fights. They're expensive, and you have to prove that that was the intention of the dad, not to give it to his son directly. The other problem I have with people putting their kids on their accounts with them is if they have any liability exposure, if they get into a car accident, if they go through divorce, or if they get sued for any other reason, that asset, that has their name on it is something that has to be listed as something available for creditors. So it puts someone's personal assets at risk when they add someone to the account with them. The way to avoid dealing with having to add somebody to your account so they have access to your account if they need it for your benefit is to have a power of attorney. By having a durable general power of attorney, you can name Joe Jr. to be the person who makes decisions for you if you're incapacitated. He doesn't own your account. He's actually managing the account for your benefit. So if he gets sued, it doesn't have any impact on your assets. But it allows him to be able to be helpful to you if you need him to pay your bills because you cannot do that any longer. So there are some better approaches to having someone assist you than putting their names on the accounts. And that better approach is to have a durable general power of attorney. I've done another video on that issue that you can also access that talks to you about what those look like. On the POD and TOD, the only other issue that I would mention to you again is that if you're going to name people as beneficiaries of all of your assets, you just have to think about where liquidity would come from, where would there be cash available to someone to pay your bills after you've passed away, and to have that money accessible if you've not paid for your cremation or your burial expenses.